Hey everyone, welcome back to the 443 Security Simplified. I'm your host, Mark the Liberty, and joining me today is
Corey, already on vacation, not Reiner.
fully checked out in his holiday sweater, which that's the
This is
WatchGuard branded
literally
holiday
my
sweater,
last
isn't
day.
it?
Yeah, it is. It is. It's
I'm
literally my
still
last day
jealous.
before a nice break. So
Nice.
I do have stuff to do, but it's hard to concentrate.
Well, on today's episode, the last one before Corey totally checks out for the year, we are going to go through our predictions for 2025. So I guess without any further ado, let's go ahead and
Sled
make
on
our
in?
way in. Yeah, sled on in. That sounds good. It's probably
On
snowing there.
Sort of Dasher and Dancer and all of the rest. I forget. I'm a bad
Nailed
little
it.
kid dad. My kids are old adults now. I haven't had to sing that for a decade.
So, Corey, it is the end of the year, and I guess all these are already live on WatchGuard.com. But as the end of the year, and after just putting out our predictions recap episode, you know what time it is then, right?
Prediction time. Cybersecurity predictions. Woohoo.
Yep. So if you followed our last episode, you're already aware that every year we publish our cybersecurity predictions for the coming year, where we try and ground them into following the trends that we've been seeing bubble up for the past, sometimes even couple of years, or at least what we expect to see coming into the next one. Last episode, we graded ourselves on how well we did for 2024. This episode, it is time to introduce our predictions for 2025. I guess before we jump in, Corey, do you want to expand a bit more on like why we do these every single year?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've kind of heard this story. It's similar to why we do the Internet Security Report, but more fun. I would say that I am personally kind of sick of the fact that everybody and their brother at the end of the year, whatever industry you're in, does the end of the year predictions for next year. But it is human nature, and it's not because we're trying to be Nostradamus. We're not like egotistical folks that think we're so smart we can predict every action of the future. The reality is, the end of the year is just a good time to kind of go over the real trends, the grounded actual trends that do exist, to imagine how they might evolve next year and change. And in some cases, we imagine either the worst case or the best case scenario of how, based on these trends, how will things get better or worse. And it's not because we necessarily think our exact prediction will always be right, but it is worthwhile because if we're, for instance, imagining the worst, we'll also talk about what we can do to avoid a negative trend from continuing and try to maybe, best case scenario, part of why we're doing the predictions is we're hoping defenders and the industry make changes so our more nasty predictions don't come true. And that means you updating your defenses or thinking about new topics in a new way. So really, long story short, the predictions are mostly based on, looking at real trends, trying to imagine how they might be if we don't change things in order for us to all change things before 2025 starts happening.
Well, speak for yourself because I do believe all of my predictions will come true.
You are Nostradamus then.
At least I pretend to be. So,
As everyone remembers from our last podcast, we actually were pretty darn good, man. I think we got 83.3% with the four wins and the two meh for half
it
credit.
is definitely the highest that I remember us getting
Yeah,
in
we've
recent
gotten
memory.
70s before, but that the 80s is our highest yet, I believe.
And here I used to be proud of the 60s we would get sometimes too.
The passing grade, but barely.
Exactly. So enough of that, though. How about we go ahead and jump in and start introducing our predictions? That sound good?
Yeah. Why don't I take the first one then, Mark? So prediction number one, I'll just blurt it out, but then me and Mark will talk about some of the trends behind it before we go deeper into the prediction we blurt out. And prediction number one, drum roll, is malicious use of multimodal AI will start to assist and create the entire malicious attack chain.
That really
So
rolls off the tongue, doesn't it?
I know, right? Multimodal. I'm going to be talking about both multi and single modal AI, but also saying AI and machine learning models. And I know people already probably have issues with my enunciation. So flipping between modal and models is not going to be easy.
Good luck.
Yeah. Well, in either case, there is a lot to unpack. So let's start with multimodal. I mean, I think a lot of our listeners are pretty savvy tech folks, but a lot of the machine learning and AI models that have been available to the public in the past years, even ChatGPT, the initial versions up to three, have been single modal AI or machine learning models, essentially meaning they're good at one specific thing. So it's easiest to talk about generative AI, even though there's lots of different AI models. But with generative AI, a single modal model is like a large language model. It would be very good at taking text input and giving you text replies. But if you started asking it for images or video or sound, it wouldn't know what to do. Chat gpt was smart enough that maybe if you asked it for help to write a presentation using the single modal text large language model, it would say, hey, here's all the text you should use. By the way, I can't do images for you and I can't make this presentation. So it would describe images you might use, but it couldn't do it all for you. However, one of the big trends is in the last year, especially multimodal AI services and tools have really been popping up. I believe ChatGPT 4.0, it can do images, text, and sound all together. So you can now ask questions where it's getting more towards the real AI that we imagine in science fiction, which is more a general artificial intelligence that acts more like a human. The new term for that is AGI, artificial general intelligence, and we're moving that way quickly. So now that they're multimodal, that just means these kind of machine learning and AI tools can be much more useful for all kinds of different things. The other thing is AI is starting to turn more into something that does true reasoning. Usually ML, machine learning, is statistics at scale. Even early chat GPT and other large language models, I used to call them just kind of like your text autocomplete on your phone on steroids. It wasn't actually answering a question you posed to it, for instance. Rather, it was using that question as context. It was statistically figuring out each individual word that would be most likely in a response. So the AI model wasn't doing reasoning to give you a real response. It was just statistically putting out the language there that is the most statistically likely answer, regardless of if it were right or wrong or anything like that. But now with OpenAI's new O1 model, they now have a true reasoning model where after, for instance, the large language model has come up with a response, it will start to do reasoning. It will start to do things like math and checking its results, and it will actually be able to tell you why it has come up with that actual logical, reasonable answer. And all that means is it's actually much more powerful. It can make decisions in a more human way and be much better. I forget the name of the test. I think it's AIME, and it's a mathematical test. And previously, large language models like ChatGPT 3 and 4 only got like 13% on any sort of mathematical reasoning test. And I think the new O1 model is something like 81% now. So much better at reasoning. So, long story short, AI is very much evolving to being able to do general things and actually thinking about every step of its answers and the things it does, acting much more human like than it has before. Now, meanwhile, threat actors have been playing with single modal AI forever to do individual malicious things. Like LLMs were great for writing spear phishing emails, but they may not be good for instance, finding vulnerabilities in a particular organization online. You could have another single modal AI that might be really good at finding software vulnerabilities. You could have another that's really good at writing custom malicious code. You could create a single modal model that might scan networks and predict which open ports would have the most openings, or so on and so forth. So bad guys have been using single modal AI for a long time, and it's pretty ubiquitous in the attack tools. But now that multimodal is coming out, that's new options for the underground. The other trend that's happening is, it's not just attackers experimenting with these tools. On the deep web and the underground, most phishing kits, I think like 22% of them, have AI tools built in. It's really become more commoditized and easier for non-technical attackers to get their hands on these at least single modal AI tools on the underground. So adding all those trends up together, when you have reasoning multimodal AI, what the kill chain is, the cyber kill chain, it's really all the different steps an attacker goes through. First, they have to find a viable target. Then they have to research or enumerate that target to find out a good way to break into them, whether it's technical or social engineering. Then they have to do the attack, the technical attack or social engineering attack, which may mean exploiting a vulnerability. Then, once they have one computer, their attack starts all over from the inside. They have to enumerate the internal network, take over many other computers, eventually find the keys to the kingdom, and either exfiltrate data or do something bad. So that's ultimately the attack chain. Each one has different steps. And until recently, while attackers have often automated the pwning a single computer, they haven't really automated the internal pivoting and lateral movement as well. And that's when a human actor usually comes in, threat actor. But our prediction is using multimodal AI, that entire attack chain can be automated, which will become increasingly dangerous because now that just increases the volume of how often bad guys can breach networks if they can automate the entire attack chain.
Man,
So lots of words, but that's the prediction in a nutshell. Mark, is there anything I missed or you want to add after I gave that vocal diarrhea?
yeah. Despite flubbing half the other words, I think you got modal and model correct every single time. So well done on that bit, at least. Um, but no,
Yay.
nothing else to add on that one other than the smart aleck comment. Let's move on though for the second prediction, though, if that sounds good.
Oh,
So the next
absolutely.
prediction is threat actors move to the long con, especially for digital supply chain attacks. And when we look at the trends for this one, there's a few key ones that we've been following. So first off, attackers have been going after the digital supply chain for years now. This can come in the form of attacking the RMM tools that we use to try and gain access to all the MSPs that use them and all of their customers as well. We've seen attacks against Python package indexes as well too, and source code repositories and all sorts of different libraries out there. But one of the trends that we've seen really starting to increase in recent years are those attacks against open source software, and in some cases, the less well known open source software that is still widely used. And I think XZUtils was a great example of this. If you remember a couple months ago, there was what could have been the biggest supply chain attack in history against effectively every single Linux system out there, whether it be Ubuntu, Red Hat, Kali Linux, or embedded Linux on every IoT device. Almost all of them use this XZUtils compression library under the hood. It's one of the 3,000 default packages installed in the Ubuntu ecosystem, for example. And an attacker spent 2 years building up cred over time and ultimately injecting malicious code into this as well too. And it was only detected because a single Microsoft engineer noticed that their SSH logins took zero point 0.5 tenths or zero point 0.5 seconds versus zero point 0.1 seconds. So like a couple tenths of a second slower is how they discovered this and started troubleshooting it. I think any normal sane person probably wouldn't have noticed that minor bit of lag, but we dodged a bullet thanks to them and their observation for that. And so
Luckily, I
this
believe wasn't they. I think even a normal developer wouldn't notice that, but this guy was doing something that was using OpenSSH at scale. So we were also lucky in their job role that those milliseconds mattered to what they were specifically designing, I guess.
Exactly. And so this was just one package included in Linux. There are literally thousands that come in the default installations for these. And then their entire galaxies, as they call them, have tens of thousands in there available for installation and still commonly used. And so all it would take is compromising one of those packages, either by slowly building up cred and then slipping in some malicious code, or compromising the account of a developer to take over it, or any other avenue to effectively insert a little bit of code that has a massive impact. And so our prediction is that attackers are going to focus on that long con of slowly building up cred to go after some of these lesser known applications or lesser known packages to create a pretty devastating attack. Corey, anything you want to add?
No, I agree with this, and I think it's a big deal, and it's interesting. Even you and I, who probably know Linux more than the average Windows administrator, and probably know a lot of individual packages just because of following vulnerabilities in open source. Ones like XYUtils, which, I mean, as soon as I knew it was a compression library, it makes sense. I had literally not heard of it, but like you mentioned, it's ubiquitous with every Linux install. And that's just one of probably many other packages that's in every single Linux install, but might not be. It's they're not always the big names like OpenSSH, OpenSSL, Apache, whatever. Sometimes there's these little packages that everyone has, but no one knows anything about, and they're ripe targets for these long con attacks.
100%. So for time's sake, let's go on to the next prediction then, Corey.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
think you got this one.
Cool. I'll try to go fast. This one is generative AI, and as it enters the industry disillusionment phase, which I'll talk a little bit about, bad actors, meanwhile, realize it's very valuable still and leverage it to profit. So, what do we mean about this? Well, if you've been around the last 2 years, you know everyone is talking about generative AI, and it's for until recently very optimistically, right? This is going to solve all kinds of problems, do efficiencies, lower costs for businesses. Now that it can make images and copy and text, and maybe even take a lot of white collar jobs. The positive part of that is that we can make our work life much easier as writers, illustrators, or businesses by using generative AI as an efficiency tool. So there's been a lot of good hype for generative AI. However, in the last few months, all this money has been spent to really increase its capability, and some companies have invested to use it, but they're not seeing any profits in return yet. And this is actually so analysts agree it's hitting what at least Gartner calls the trowel of disillusionment. And if you're not familiar, Gartner's a huge analyst, but if you're not familiar, they have something called the hype cycle, which applies to all technology. And once you know it, actually it makes a lot of sense. It's very intuitive. Whenever there's a new technology that somebody discovers or makes, they try to hype people up about it, get people excited. And maybe it is a very exciting technology. So this innovation trigger point, people start building upon it and hyping it up and getting the world excited for something very, very new. But usually, I mean, if you're a gamer, you probably remember things like No Man's Sky, or was it Mark Peter Molyneux who made lots of promises with how cool Fable will be?
Yeah.
If you get really hyped for something new, but then it first comes out and it doesn't even come close to matching that expectation, that's disappointing as hell. And that's when these technologies start to hit that trowel of disillusionment. The people that are making them are legitimately very excited about them, but the first phase or first versions of them are usually not nearly as powerful as they're expected to become. And if you overpromise, you get this big trial of disillusionment. And I believe, as you can see in Gartner's chart, but I believe personally that's what generative AI is hitting because of all its hallucinations, jacked up teeth, multiple fingers, Will Smith eating noodles turning into comedy, impossible physics videos.
Shrimp
There's a,
Jesus.
yeah, Shrimp Jesus. You mentioned a good one, though, one that is more convincing, which is like Puffy White Coat Pope or Trench Coat Pope. So generative AI is entering that. But that does not mean the technology is bad. In fact, as we just talked about before, this generative AI is getting better and better, almost scarily good. So we know eventually it's going to come out of that trial of disillusionment to what they call the slope of enlightenment, where it does get better and better. And then it eventually becomes operationalized and just is used by everyone. So that's what's happening to generative AI. And the world, normal people are thinking, oh, it's not such a big deal. It's not helping me yet. It's been overpromised. Meanwhile, the bad guys are seeing the improvement. The bad guys are using it more and more. Their spear phishing is getting better. It's making some of the social engineering that they do easier. Deep fakes, in particular, I won't go into detail because we've talked about it on the podcast, but the situation where a Singaporean accountant transferred $25 million because he got onto a business call with what looked like his CFO in video with the right voice, which was all actually deepfake generative AI related stuff. All of that's getting very good. So as the world is thinking this stuff is not that great, attackers are, the prediction is attackers are going to start to use it and they're going to take advantage of it big time and profit from it. So that's the prediction. The recommendation, the practical tip is, even though generative AI isn't perfect yet, you should be worried about it. You should still continue to use generative AI in positive ways as it gets better, but you should be ready for attackers to actually leverage it and make sure that you teach your users about it. Anything you would add, Mark?
No, I don't think so. Basically, just even though, half the images you see might have one too many fingers on them, doesn't mean that attackers can't make a very convincing deepfake to go after your users.
Exactly. And by the way, that sixth finger is starting to disappear. We are getting to the point where things like Sora and other things it's getting into more and more trivial details to really tell the difference between fake and real. And it seems pretty clear to me we'll eventually hit a point where humans won't be able to do it without technology finding things that we can't even see between real and fake. And frankly, I do think we need watermarks one day. For the sake of it, just because this next one's business related, I'm going to take it really quick, Mark, before handing back off to you. But let's go into prediction number 4. This is more kind of a business one, and I guess I'll take it because while my title is CSO, I'm basically the CISO of WatchGuard Technology. And this prediction might seem a little depressing, but it's the role of CISO is going to become the least desirable role in business. So that sounds kind of depressing, but there are some trends that are showing cybersecurity in general, our cybersecurity workforce is suffering some burnout and some feelings of lack of appreciation. And some of the things leading to this is, first of all, the cybersecurity skills gap, which means, do we have the people with the right cybersecurity skills to fill the jobs that we currently are looking for? If not, that's a gap. And that gap is currently outpacing hiring. So this data actually comes from ICS Squared, who, if you follow certifications like CISSP, they're the organization that does that. I'll start with the good news. The good news is our cybersecurity field is growing. The cybersecurity workforce during 2023, this is their most recent data. We expect the 2024 report to come out early next year. But with their most recent data, we now have over 5.4 billion people in the cybersecurity workforce, which is 8.7% year over year growth. That's a good thing. The bad thing is the amount of unfilled positions in cybersecurity is also growing. In 2022, this was approximately 3.4 million, but in 2023, we almost have 4 million unfilled cybersecurity positions, which is a 12.6% year over year growth in unfilled cybersecurity jobs. So, unfortunately, the workforce gap, these lack of skills, are outpacing the actual hiring of cybersecurity folks. And there are also many, many surveys showing that cybersecurity professionals are feeling burnt out and underappreciated. And if you think about it, if you aren't filling jobs, that means you need help. You already have acknowledged you need help and are looking for folks to help you, but you can't fill those jobs. So the people doing cybersecurity are often doing multiple people's jobs at once. On top of that, CISOs in particular, they will take the brunt of it. I mean, one, they don't want their employees to feel burnt out. If they feel burnt out, they have to do more work themselves. And on top of that, they want their employees to be happy and able to have the resource to do their job. But on top of that, cybersecurity has now board and industry focus. And if you're negligent at it, the CISO in particular can suffer legal action. It was kind of the Uber CISO's fault because they were kind of trying to hide the fact that they'd been hacked from the world and deal with hackers. But
Kind
the
of trying to
cybersecurity,
hide is putting that very kindly for them. They were
yeah,
straight up trying to
yeah,
bribe the threat actor to sweep it under the rug.
exactly, which is bad. And by the way, I don't promote that CISO, but that CISO is suffering legal actions because of their illegal activity. And on top of that, ones like the target executives, while they may not have suffered legal action, if you're not good at security, or even if you are good but something happens, guess what? You're going to be the head that's chopped. So these CISOs are also facing more board focus too. And if things aren't right, they can completely lose their job or go to jail if they make mistakes and do things wrong, intentionally or not. So it puts a lot of pressure on the CISOs and the cybersecurity workforce as well. And on top of that, when you have global economic, issues that are creating economic pressures, security budgets are one of the first things to kind of either pause or get cut, or at least lessened when you're just trying to pay the bills. So all of this leads to, cybersecurity folks, you know, it being a position that not a lot of people might want because it seems like a very, very tough job. I do think there's hope here. I don't want us to lose our cybersecurity workforce, especially, or even our good CISOs. So, what we need to do as an industry is solve the cybersecurity skills gap and get more people interested in security and find ways to definitely hold CISOs and companies accountable for security, but make sure they're resourced and have all the right tools so that they do their job properly. Do you have any thoughts on this one, Mark?
I think the only thing I'd add, and what I was thinking of also when we were coming up with this prediction, was there's actually regulatory action coming down the pipeline too that's going to make it even more stressful to be a CISO. Like NIS2 in Europe is imminent in like I think 3 or 4 years or so, and it puts personal liability on the CISO as well as the board and I think the CEO as well
That's an
too
excellent
for
point.
cybersecurity outcomes. Where now
Yeah.
it does have effectively maybe not safe harbor, that's probably not the right word, but as long as you aren't negligent, like you're not going to be in trouble. But if you are like the Uber CEO, now there is or CISO, there is directly like a law to hold you accountable for
We
being
talk about
negligent.
this all the time, you and I, in that the thing is, like, if you're a good CISO, you shouldn't need compliance or regulation to do the right thing. So I agree with you. The law does put more pressure on it, though, because even if you are doing the right thing, there's always exceptions, like little business things. So I'm glad they have the safe harbor law. But the point is, I personally wouldn't be worried about like I get that technically it puts more legal potential pressure on me, but I want to be the CISO that's doing the right thing anyway. So the positive lean here is I do think CISOs, if you're really passionate about security and you are trying to do the right thing with the resources you have, you shouldn't be over worried about this. I would pay it. I think you're exactly right, Mark, that regulation and compliance will put more pressure on it, but it should only put more pressure on the CISOs that are acting negligent, that simply don't care. And that's why I think the bigger problem for CISOs is even if I want to do the right thing, or even if I am doing the right thing, the lack of resource makes it very hard. And I need you and I who know this. We need the cultural support of the whole company to do our job. So, trying to find a way to make security just a good part of business that everyone supports is something that could help this particular problem.
Yep.
But I think we've beat this horse. At least I feel this way because I don't want to talk about CISOs going to jail anymore. So let's
Let's
move
move
on to
on
the
to the
next
next.
one, Mark.
So the next prediction is the good guys' disruption of threat actors starts to have a meaningful impact. So this is one that I think I at least pitched this idea when we were coming up with it, and it's because I've noticed even on my own a bit of a personal shift on my beliefs on like how well the FBI and international law enforcement cyber threat actor disruption efforts are actually working. So it was, I think, around 2019, 2020, where the FBI, or it was the DOJ Deputy Attorney General, Lisa Monaco, I think is her name, basically told the FBI it's time to take the gloves off and found legal avenues to let them take more proactive technical operations to go disrupt threat actors. This could be going in and removing malware off a system. I think the very first example was proxy logon for Exchange, where they went in and removed web shells and patched the servers as well too. We had an encounter with this with Cyclops Blink with going and disrupting the
Yeah.
botnet,
And I
and
think they
even in
found yeah, Cyclops Sphinx a good example. And I think they found a specific legal, like, there's always a question of, even with good intentions, can you go on someone else's system legally and do that? But they found a very good and I think just legal reason to do that, that they've been using since, taking the
in
gloves off,
uh,
so to speak.
in some of their takedowns this year, they've been even more aggressive on installing patches and adding like permanent block lists to prevent IPs from reconnecting to it. And this is just the FBI, and their jurisdiction only lets them do this in the United States. So they've built up this partnership with like external international law enforcement to be able to do the same activity coordinated as a single technical operation effectively across the entirety of the world, or at least the parts of the world that are most hit by some of these
Five Eyes.
operations. Exactly.
At least the ones that
Even
we're
beyond
friends
Five
with, not
Eyes,
the adversaries. Well,
like
yeah.
the Dutch law enforcement, their equivalent to the FBI, which I can never remember their acronym, but they're one of the ones that have been very prolific with working with the FBI recently. The Dutch law enforcement. But so over the last
Yeah,
year
yeah.
alone, they've had 30 disruption operations with a lot of pretty key wins as well too. We've seen them take down Lockbit. I know Alpha V slash Black Cat wasn't necessarily a takedown, but it was the FBI basically saying, we're coming for you and pushing them into retirement. They've taken down Hive, which is a pretty popular ransomware as a service operator at its time, CACBot, a very popular botnet. And each of these has had a bit of an impact. Like Black Cat slash Alpha V has not come back. Maybe some of their operators have moved on to different ransomware as a service, but that operator on its own is gone effectively. And that's basically been what the FBI is going for and international law enforcement. I know I keep saying the FBI. It is literally a partnership between both law enforcement and private organizations too. But their whole point is when you make something more expensive and when you make it more risky, you make it less likely for someone to actually do it. So now if those threat actors have to go and spin up an entire new set of infrastructure to be able to run their ransomware as a service campaigns, if now there's a genuine risk that they might get arrested or named and shamed and never be allowed to leave their country, which is almost always Russia, ever again. I shouldn't, well, I guess I should throw Russia under the bus. It is almost always them. But there's even been like Ukrainians that have been picked up in these
Yeah.
operations too. Like all of these make it less likely for them to launch these attacks
Yeah, and I
again in
would
the
say
future.
even besides the riskiness, I think it's going after the profit and costs. Like the reason we mentioned that, oh yeah, they took down so and so botnet, but it can just come back tomorrow as a new variant. That is still true technically, but the thing is, every time it happens, whatever profit they've gained from an attack might disappear in them having to redo all the infrastructure. Even if they're like, I get you that naming and shaming does have an effect, especially for travel. But I think it's more important, like, if you keep getting caught and your CNCs taken down, and sometimes even your cryptocurrency wallets or any other bank accounts might be frozen, that's even stronger in that, yeah, you're not arrested and you could do it again, but are you going to keep throwing money at resource at something that your profits keep disappearing from? So I think it's very like, yes, I would love the real threat actors to suffer jail time or have a consequence like that, but taking away the money at least makes them not have a reason to keep trying to do a unprofitable business.
Yep. And law enforcement's gotten really good with these takedowns lately too. I think it was Lockbit, but I'm sure someone will correct me if I'm wrong. Where they actually, after the first disruption, they went to go restore from backups because even as a ransomware as a service operator, they still had a business continuity and disaster recovery plan. But those backups actually
Maybe
had,
better than some real businesses.
yeah. Well, in this case, their backups actually had the FBI's implant in it still because they had done it such a long time before that as soon as they restored, they were knocked right back out again, and all of their newly earned cryptocurrency was taken again too. So, like, if you'd asked me like 3 years ago, I would have thought the FBI, they're doing what they can, but this isn't actually going to do anything. Like, they're just going to pop right back up and continue launching ransomware. But like, even in just the last year, I feel entirely different now, where I feel like we are actually seeing meaningful effects in this. Ransomware operators dropping off the face of the earth or quote unquote retiring, where I think these takedowns, these good guy efforts are actually they're working. So
I
the
agree.
prediction is really boiling down to that, where all of this effort, the international law enforcement, their partnerships with private organizations, are all having a meaningful impact on helping doorbell threat act or helping stop a threat actors these days.
Yeah, I agree with this. I might give a little shout out to private organizations. I could pat ourselves on the back for the ones that work with the FBI, but what I actually mean is there are also even some private organizations where they simply don't have the legal power to do the takedowns the FBI can, but a lot of them have learned to go after the money. And I think Microsoft in particular takes legal action against botnets. They may not know the threat actor, but they can take legal action against the back end bulletproof hosting providers of botnets. They can sometimes take legal action against banks and other things to kind of stop the money. So I think companies like Microsoft have focused on using legal actions to target the profit centers or infrastructure of threat actors too, which also kind of helps. So I agree with this, and I think we should give law enforcement kudos for finding it. It's a hard problem. How do you arrest people that are literally in adversarial countries that don't even have a partnership with your country? So there's limited things that people can do for, like, law enforcement in the US can do for cyber attacks that are often outside our country. That's one of the issues with the internet, but they sure have found a great way to handle it. This next one, I think in our webinar, I took it, but knowing that I have done three, was I supposed to take it, or is this one you want to cover, Mark, or should I
No,
just
it's
go
you just
again?
you stealing my thunder as usual. It's okay. It's fine. I'm okay. But I'll go ahead and take this one anyway. So the last
Cool.
prediction that we had for our official roundup was organizations will rely on AI anomaly detection for operational technology. So this is yet another AI prediction, but not a generative AI one like the previous one or most of ours from last year. This is going back to the deep learning AI models, or machine learning as we like to call it, that we've been using in cybersecurity for a long time. We've been using AI and machine learning because it is very good at ingesting and learning off of large amounts of data, and then finding anomalies within that data. And that makes it really easy to get a baseline of like what a normal network might look like and alert off of potential deviations from that baseline within an organization. And this prediction is specifically focusing on operational technology, which historically has been a bit of a gap as we're seeing more and more OT being connected to traditional IT networks, where we can install an endpoint agent to do vulnerability assessment and endpoint protection on a Windows, Linux, Mac OS server, whatever. You can't necessarily install it on your refrigerator or your toaster to protect it from threats that might end up there.
Or
And this
your
is where
robotic arm, or MRI machine, or whatever SCADA equipment, not SCADA equipment,
exactly.
but industrial control equipment might be in an energy power plant.
Yeah. But one of the coolest things about like network-based AI anomaly detection is it does not care what that endpoint is. It doesn't care if it's your fridge or a robot arm at a factory or the water cooler in the office. It's able to get a baseline of just what normal is for that endpoint, for what it communicates to, traffic volumes, times, patterns, things like that. And then it can alert off of deviations that could help you catch if that machine has been compromised by a threat actor at some point. And so this was I wouldn't say it was driven by product, but it's one that is like somewhat related to relatively new services from WatchGuard that we launched with our ThreatSync Plus NDR. But it's basically boiling down to now is the age of needing artificial intelligence driven anomaly detection on the network that, again, does not care what the endpoint is, but can protect against those threats that are there. Corey, do you want to expand on that?
I actually think you covered it very well. And I think the only thing I would add is, on the dystopia side of things, you hear us talking a lot of scary things about AI. But the truth is, I think Mark and I both like that. We think the technology has a lot of beneficial opportunity. It can be something that I personally think can improve humanity if we can get through the economical problems. But the issue is that it's a very asymmetrically powerful technology, like nuclear fusion or fission, where it's up to humanity to use it for the right reasons and to prevent people from using it to get that same power for malicious reasons. And I think it is important to talk about and have AI security is we're going to get a day and age where the only way to prevent AI threats is to have AI security. It's likely, as much as it's been in science fiction, it's going to be machine against machine one day. So we definitely, if you're not using AI in your security yet, you definitely need to do it soon. I don't think we have to cover them, Mark. If we do have a webinar on this, which is ultimately the same. If you listen to this, you probably don't need to listen to the webinar. But do know the webinar threw in a few other predictions that aren't official, but we do talk about other things. Like we talked about data privacy law potentially coming to the US in a bad way, in that a bunch of different, it's not going to be a federal law, it's going to be lots of different states doing it, which we all kind of maybe want good privacy law, but the problem is if we're doing it different from every state, that's going to be a nightmare for companies and legal. And we also talked a little bit about how the US government starting to ban goods and services from other countries for potentially good intentions, like they're worried about cyber espionage and vulnerabilities, but that could lead to those other countries banning our technologies in a new type of trade war that's more based on cybersecurity paranoia. But maybe we'll save that. Well, that's on the webinar if you're interested in talking about it. So I'll hand it back to you, Mark.
Yeah. So I think the main thing from this, though, is all these predictions, while they may be the extreme end in some cases, they're all grounded in a trend that we're seeing. And I'm pretty hopeful for when we do our grading at the end of next year. I think the only one that might be a bit of a difficult one to hit is that long con one, just because that would have relied on an attacker compromising something 3 years ago.
I think the full attack chain could be hard to. You actually, we missed talking about a point that you noticed is we had actually internally made the prediction already, but there's some research where researchers tried to do the using AI for the full attack chain, and they were relatively successful in I think 20% of the situations. So it has really strong trends, but it relies on threat actors doing it quickly. So I think maybe that one, it probably will be one of the ones that will hit at least halfway, but attackers may not literally get to the full attack chain unless a nation state gets involved. The problem is if a nation state doing this may be under everyone's radar until 5 years later. So I agree with you, the long con one, I think it's certainly happening and it's probably happening right now. It's just we won't know about the long con until the end of it. So if it takes 5 years to do a long con, did they start 4 years ago or did they start 3 years ago? Will be the question on when that one will hit.
I guess we will see. And I had hoped that any one of my 12 Blue Sky followers was going to give us a prediction to chat about on this episode too, but unfortunately, none of them decided to pipe in on that. But we'll extend the invitation still. If you guys have a prediction you want us to talk about and give our feedback on, you can shoot that over to us. I'm sure you can find our email somewhere. Otherwise, my Blue Sky handle is it's mark.me. Corey is secadept
Blue Sky, whatever the normal domain is.
Whatever the heck it is. Yeah. Because Corey's not cool enough to get his own vanity domain quite yet.
And to be honest, I probably have no. I think you actually have to use the platform to start sharing before you get noticed. And lately, I have not had time for that. I had built this big Twitter and YouTube following, and unfortunately, I need to find ways to cultivate it again.
Yeah, start from scratch. The race is on, Corey.
I'll just start doing daily security bites again.
There you go. Fun predictions this year. Let's see how they pan out for 2025. Hey everyone, thanks again for listening. As always, if you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. If you have any questions on today's topics or suggestions for future episode topics, you can reach out to us on Instagram at WatchGuard_technologies or Blue Sky at itsmark.me or secadept. Thanks again for listening. We are off the next 2 weeks for the holidays. You will hear from us after the new year. See you all then.